So I'm leaving Nara deer park where there's a bunch of deers. It's in Japan, and all the deers, they get fed by the tourists. Tourists come in, give them biscuits, they bow their head, and then they get fed biscuits. And I was thinking how similar this sort of correlation is like to people on government payments. You know, if you come from a first world country like Australia, UK, New Zealand, or America, you know, you can get government payments. In Australia we call it Centrelink, where you basically, just like the deers, you bow your head, you follow the rules, you take the supplements, the injections that the government wants you to. If you do everything as asked, they'll give you that fortnightly paycheck of $300, $400, $500. And it's very, very similar to the deers. They go around, they nod, they go to tourists, and tourists feed them food, they pose for the photos, and then they get their food. And it's quite, you know, it's quite sad because I feel like there's not much fulfillment in it. Previously the deers would have to go out, they have to hunt food, they have to roam and compete against other sort of groups of deers, but now they sort of just like pray and bow down to humans to give them a biscuit, give them a cookie. And that is very, very similar to what a lot of people are currently doing. They're just sort of bowing down to the governments, doing what the governments ask for that, you know, fortnightly government paycheck. And it's only going to get worse. Eventually, you know, you're going to do it for food stamps, you do it for everything. So I think that's the metaphor I saw, just seeing all these deers do what they needed to do, pose, smile, act for the camera, and it keeps them fed. But what else can they do? They're now sort of in a world that is very metropolized. They can't really, there's no nature around here. They can't really escape to the forest, the real forest. They no longer have the skill sets to sort of survive on their own, so they're forced to do this for the rest of their eternity. You know, we're talking about, like, it's pretty smart how the deers know where not to go. Like, they know not to go into the main city, they know not to cross the roads because, you know, they might get hit by a car. And that's just done probably through natural selections. The deers that were not smart enough that did that died off, so the remaining deers are smart enough not to do it, so their kids avoid doing it. So they get more and more sort of restricted to the little plot of forest they have, and they pray that tourists will keep coming to keep them fed. So I think if we go off that sort of trajectory and we sort of see that metaphor as a metaphor for humans, as things get more and more restricted, as we start getting into electric cars, start getting electric smart locks, and we go into government housing, 5-minute cities, eventually if you need to do this, do that, like let's say you need to get some injections, you need to do 40 hours of sort of boring, mundane factory work, and then on top of that you need to sort of maybe complete some surveys, you need to vote in the next election, and if you do all those things, then they'll allow you to get that weekly payment check, which half of it would go to some climate change sort of scheme and taxes. And if you don't, they're gonna lock your locks so you can't leave the house, they're gonna stop your electric car so you can't drive anywhere. And that's exactly what's happening to the deers. So see that metaphor, try to avoid it, and you know, it's not as glamorous as it seems. I think that's another scary thing. On Instagram, you see people come take photos with the deer, like, wow, that looks so freaking cool. But then you go here, it's just a crowd of tourists and a crowd of people just feeding, you know, these deers, and it looks much, much more sad and dystopian than what it looks like online. Like this whole city, their mascot is this sort of deer, but they're sort of capitalizing on this dystopian race of animals. Yeah. So hopefully you guys get that metaphor. I guess the conclusion is, while we're not really like, if we were a deer, if I was a deer, I'd be, you know, stuffed basically. So while that's not the case, while we still have a bit of freedom, have a chance to sort of escape the matrix, push hard, try your best, because it's only going to get harder and harder, especially with AI, especially as governments monopolize more and more. Like right now they're monopolizing the farms, like they control the food source, just like how these deers are forced to eat the 200 yen crackers that the stores and businesses around here sell for us tourists to feed the deers. The same thing's going to happen in the future. So try to get ahead of the curve, and push while you still can, because you don't want to end up like a deer in Nara.